Welcome. In today's video, I'm going to show you how to build a project management app from scratch. I'm going to start by showing you a simple outline of how I think about apps as I start to build them, and then we'll go through those steps to build out that app, including custom object, custom fields, and building a screen flow in order to create projects from templates. I think this is going to be a really valuable exercise for anybody who wants to learn how to build apps within Salesforce and for any admins that want to improve their skills. If you don't want to go through all those steps to build this out yourself, we've actually done the work for you. And you can purchase the finished app on our website by clicking the link in the description below. For everybody else that wants to learn how to build these sorts of apps yourself, let's get started. So the first thing I'll do when I'm building out a solution is I'll create a simple list of things I think I need to build. Essentially an outline of the data model. Now there's lots of solutions that are actually pretty simple. You can probably keep a lot of that in your head, but it does help just to get it down on paper to make sure you're not missing anything. So in this case, I want to create a very simple project management tool that's leveraging the standard Salesforce tasks object. So what that means is that I'm going to need to build a project object. A record that's got probably the status on it, maybe the due date, probably an owner field, those sorts of things. And then I'm also going to want to be able to create templates. So that's really easy to recreate the same project over and over again. So I'm going to want to create a project template object. And that would also mean that I'll want to have a project task template object. That way I can have my template and all my tasks related to that template that probably has a relative date field. So then when I create a new project from that template, I know, how many days out do I put these different tasks. Next thing I know I'm going to want to create is an app within Salesforce to house all these objects and make them really easy to access. And then we'll definitely want to create a screen flow where we can have the user choose from any of our current templates and then create a new project based on that. And finally, we'll probably want to create a permission set that provides access to all these different objects that we've created to make it really easy to give access to different users within the org. This is a piece that's pretty easy to miss. When you're creating your own app in Salesforce, you're a system admin. So you already have access to these objects that you're creating, but most people in your org should not be admins and therefore would not have access to these objects by default. So the end game here is I want to be able to have a project object that has tasks related to it and be able to create new projects based off templates. As I go through this video, customize things to your heart's desire. That's the great part about being able to build within Salesforce. I'm going to add different fields, but I'm going to keep things pretty simple as we go through this. So if you see an opportunity to add additional details, additional fields or functionality for your business, you should absolutely do that. Don't feel like you have to stick to this example that I'm showing you here. Okay, let's build that project. Okay, so let's log into Salesforce and go to the object manager. Now, one thing to note, make sure that you're building this within a developer org or within a sandbox. We're going to be building a flow later. It's not the kind of thing that you want to test in production. I'm in a developer org here, and under object manager, I'm just going to do a quick search here to make sure that I don't already have an object called project or anything like that. And I don't. So I'm going to hit create in the upper right and choose custom object. Next thing we're going to do is provide a name for this object. I'm going to label it with project, and then the plural label will be projects. Next option we have here is what's our record name going to be? And we could either have this record name just be a text value or it could be an auto number. So with projects, they should probably have a name, a really short description of what they are. So I'm going to leave this as is actually. I think project name makes sense. I think having a data type of text makes sense as well. If you're the type of company though that has many projects and instead you'd like to create an auto number for projects in order to identify them a little bit more easily, then that's an option as well. Just choose auto number and you can fill out the values there. As far as optional features go, I absolutely want to allow reports. I want to allow activities on this project record. And I want to track some field history as well and include it in chatter groups. Under object classification, I'm going to leave the default here. And then for deployment status, leave that as default as well. And let's allow for search too. Last box to check is the final one here. It says launch new custom tab wizard after creating this object. So when you create an object within Salesforce, sometimes you want it to be easily accessible to users in the form of it having its own tab across the top of the screen. And other times it's a junction object or something. You don't really need access for that to be visible through a tab. With projects though, this is a major, application area. So we want that to be a tab. So check that box and then hit save. That's going to bring up this tab wizard. Object is project, so that's good. And then tab style, just click the little magnifying glass there, and you can choose from all these different icons for your project. I'm gonna go with the hammer icon, but of course you can choose whichever icon you want. And that's what's gonna show up in the little icon area in the upper left when we start creating our own projects. Skip the description here, click next. And now we can choose the visibility for all these different profiles. I'm gonna leave the visibility here to default on, and then click next. Now here is where we can include this tab in different apps. I haven't created the project management app yet, so I'm gonna just deselect this so that the tab doesn't show up automatically in any of these apps. We'll have a dedicated one for it later. Then hit save, and now we've created our project object. Next thing to do is go to fields and relationships and consider what additional fields you want to add to this. Right now we just have the owner field and the project name. There's a couple things right off the top of my head that I know I'm gonna want. One is a relationship field to accounts. Typically with projects, they're related to a company or a customer. So that's what I want, but you might want to change that. You might want to have a lookup field to opportunities if this is a project that's always related to an opportunity. Or you could have a lookup field to campaigns, or you could create a lookup field for all of those objects if this is going to be a general purpose tool that you're going to use across your org. So I'll click new here and scroll down, and we've got a lookup relationship and a master detail relationship. Most likely you're going to want to use a lookup relationship. Master detail relationships are great if you know that this project is always going to be associated with that other object. If you're creating this object to only be used with opportunities, as an example, go ahead and choose master detail relationship, because then you get all these benefits from roll-up summary fields. In my case though, I'm going to relate it to accounts, but I don't want to have to always relate it to an account. So I'm just going to use a standard lookup relationship here instead. Click next, then choose the object you want to relate it to. I'll choose an account. Hit next again. The default field label for account works for me. And now we can choose what profile is going to have access to this field. The default is fine for me. And I want to add this to the project layout. Next thing we're looking at here is the label for the related list. So on the account object, we'll have a related list of all the projects that are related to that account. And I think just calling it projects works perfectly fine for me. And then hit save. Next thing I think we should create is a status field. It's pretty standard when it comes to projects. We're going to use a pick list field for this. Hit next, call it status, and then enter values with each value separated by a new line. So we'll start with dropped, and then we'll have new, in progress, and completed. You could add additional stages here, whatever you need that makes sense for your particular process or business. I would encourage you though, is to keep them as general as you can in order to be able to use them in more situations. So if you're going to use this across your company, more standard general statuses are good. If it's just for a specific type of project, then go ahead and get as specific as you need. And then for default value, I'm going to check the box to use the first value. So I'll just move that dropped status to the end there. So that we go new, in progress, completed, or dropped. You could also change new to planned or in planning if that is easier for you. Then click next. We'll leave profiles default. Let's add it to the layout. And then click new again. Let's add a couple more fields here. I think a rich text field would be useful for a description. Go ahead and call this description. I think the default character count should be fine, but you can always increase it if you need to. Hit next again. And let's create a date field now for a deadline. I think that's all we're going to need for now, but some other fields you could consider adding would be a date field specifically for when the project started. You could add a priority field as well if you need to categorize your different projects. You could also have a type field if you have, say, client-facing projects versus internal projects, etc. But that looks pretty good for now. So the next object we're going to create is a project template, and it's going to be pretty similar. We're going to essentially have the same fields here. We're going to make some adjustments. Like, we don't really need to report on templates, so we don't need to include that. And we'll add an additional field to mark whether this template is active or not. To create that new object, go back to the object manager and click create in the upper right-hand corner. Select custom object, and we'll call this project template. For the object name, I'm going to call it project template Rotive. And the plural will be project templates. We'll leave the record name the same as we did before. And then I'm not going to bother checking to allow reports or activities or field history or chatter groups for these templates. We're just creating these templates as a place for us to define what tasks we want for a future real project. I don't think we need all these other features. I'm also going to deselect our object classification. We don't really need this to have API access. You could leave that checked if you want, just to have your bases covered. But I'm going to deselect that. I'll leave it as deployed. Don't need search here. Don't need notes and attachments, but I do actually want to create a custom tab. So check that last box and hit save. We used the hammer before for our icon for projects, so let's use the wrench for our icon for our project template. Click next, leave visibility to on, and again, we're not going to add this tab to any of our current apps. We'll create that project management app at the very end. Then click save, and now we can add some fields. Now let's think back to the fields we added to our actual project object. One was the account lookup field. Well, this is a template, so the actual projects will likely be related to a bunch of different accounts. I don't think we need a lookup field for the template on our project template, so we'll skip that. The other field we created was our status field. Well, similarly, I think all new projects are going to start at the same status, so I don't think we need a pick list field for statuses on our template either, so we'll skip that. And the last one was a description field. Now this actually would be useful. If we have a standard description for a project, we want that to copy over to our actual project whenever it's been created. So let's make that. Choose text area rich, then click next. And call this description. Click next again. Next again, and save and new. That'll bring us right back to the new field screen. And then the other field that I want to add here is actually a checkbox, because I think it's useful to be able to indicate if a template is active or not. So later, when we create our screen flow for someone to create a project from a template, we can have it so that the screen flow only shows us templates that are currently active, that have this box checked. So let's call this active. The default value will be unchecked. Then click next. Next again, we'll add that to the layout and hit save. Pretty simple project template object so far. The next object we're going to create is our project task template. So what we're going to do is use the data on this object to create our task records that are related to our real project. Let's start this with the label project task template. I think having a name here makes a lot of sense, but I'm actually going to change the record name. Instead of calling it project task template name, let's call this task name. The reason for that is because then we can easily take whatever the name of the task is, we can drop that in the subject line of the task that we're going to create later. If it said project task template name, that would be a little bit confusing, not clear that we're going to use that data to make our subject for our task later. So let's simplify it. We'll call it task name so that we know whatever we put in this field is going to be the subject of our task later. Now you might want to end up changing this depending on how long your task names are. So if you have task subject lines, for example, that are many characters long, we're going to run into a limit for actually using this subject for the task in the name for our task template. If you do run into that, you can use auto number for naming this record and then create another custom field for the subject of the task. But for now, I think this is the simplest thing to decrease the number of fields we need to create. So I'm going to leave that there. Again, don't need any reports or activities or field history. Don't need any of this API access. And in this case, I'm not going to create a new custom tab for this. We only really care about task templates when we're looking at a project template. We don't need to access this independently from that top bar in the form of a tab. Now that we've created our project task template object, we can create a couple fields. The first field I think we should create is a lookup from this task template to our project template. Click new. So in this case, whenever we have a task template, it's always going to be related to a project template. So we can choose master detail relationship here, and then we can take advantage of those rolled up summary fields later if we choose to. Click next. Let's have this related to our project template, should be in the list. Choose next again. So in the field here, I'm going to change this from project template to just project. And then for the child relationship name, I'll leave that as is. Project task template is fine. The purpose here is just to make it a little bit more intuitive, a little bit easier for our users when they're creating these task templates underneath project templates. I don't think we need to keep reminding them over and over again that it's a template. That should be pretty self-evident. And then on the project template record itself, we've got a related list of all those task templates underneath it. Similarly, I don't think we need to keep saying that this is a template. So instead, we can just have this named tasks. There we go. The next field we're going to create is a due date offset for our tasks. So when we create a new task record, how many days from today do we want this task to be due? And we can represent that with a number. So we can say 7 days from the creation of the project is when task A should be due. And then on a different task, we'll say 14 days. And then you get this nice, structured, laid out series of tasks whenever you create a new project. In order to create that, let's make a field that is going to have a number in it. I'm going to call this due date offset. Decimal places we'll leave to 0. I think 18 characters is a little much for the offset, but that's fine. And here you might want to add a little extra information under the help text. Number of days after the creation of the project, this task is due. We definitely want this field to be required, so you can check that. And then click Next. Next again. Add it to the layout. Perfect. Now there's a couple other fields we could add here. We could add the priority field to mirror what we have on the task object. If you want to set low, medium, high priority for tasks, we could create a lookup field to users so that when the new task is created, it's going to be owned by that specific user. Or we could create a pick list dropdown to represent who it should potentially belong to as well. We could also use a description field if we want to have extra detail on this task and insert that in the description of our newly created task. Let's go ahead and add that one. So click New. Description is just going to be a text area long because the regular description field on a task is not rich text. So we want them to match. Call that description. Click Next. Next again, and save. We're off to a good start here. We come back to our document where we just had an outline of what we want to build. We've got our project object. We've got our project template object. We created our project task template object. We haven't made an app yet, so we'll do that next. And then we'll take a look at the layouts for these different records. And then finally, we'll create our flow and our permission set. To create an app to house all these tabs, you can do that by coming back into Setup, going to Quick Find, and searching for App Manager. Under App Manager, click New Lightning App in the upper right-hand corner and give it a name. I'm going to call this Project Management. For the developer name, again, I'm going to call it Project Management Rotive, just because it's such a common name. And you could upload an image here or change the color. Click Next. Standard navigation is how I'm going to leave this a little bit easier for people to get through. Desktop and phone, I think, is fine. Regular setup is good. And I'm not worried about app personalization settings. We'll just leave that. Click Next. We could add a utility bar to this app, but I don't think we really need it. So click Next again. And now we can choose what tabs we want to add to this app. So we definitely want project templates and projects. Click Next. And now we can make this available to all of our profiles. Go and add those profiles who you'd like to have access to this app and click Save and Finish. Now, when you click on the upper left-hand corner of the app launcher, we've got a project management app that shows up. Click on that. And here we go. Project templates and projects are across the top. So let's create a new project template. So we've got a little bit of data to work with, and we'll call this onboarding project. Under description, we could add a bunch of information about what we're trying to accomplish with onboarding projects, etc. So I'm just going to say, make sure all new clients feel comfortable with our process and are familiar with the resources available to them. You could certainly expand this well beyond that to have extra instruction and guidance for your team. And I'm going to make this project active, then hit Save. Here's our project record as it comes out by default. And then under Related is where we have our tasks here. First thing I'm going to do is change this layout a little bit. So to do that, click the gear in the upper right-hand corner and click on Edit Page. You can see we're not really using the screen very well. So we've got our details and our related area here. We've got this right sidebar where we don't have any use for that currently. So under Related, I'm going to take our tasks related list and I'm going to drop that beneath our tabs here. And then on the right-hand side with tabs selected, I'm just going to get rid of that related tab. So now when you open up a project, you can see the description, you can see if it's active, you can see any tasks that are related to it. On the right-hand side here, now that I'm looking at it, I think actually it would be really helpful to have chatter over here. If you're working on project templates and you're trying to update them over time, you might want to have a discussion about those changes and those updates to tasks directly on this project template. So I'm going to leave this as is for now, but if you didn't care about chatter, if you didn't want to add it to the sidebar, you could always click change here in the bottom. And then you can change this layout template from the header and right sidebar and choose header in one region. And that would simplify things a bit. Again, I'm just going to leave it for now and then click save. Because this is a new change to a Lightning page, click activate and go ahead and set it as the org default. This is the structure that I want wherever somebody's looking at a project template record. Then hit the back button. Now let's create a couple tasks. Let's say send welcome email. The due date offset, let's say I want this to be due 0 days from the start of the project. As soon as that project is made, you should be sending that welcome email. In the description, I'm just going to add a little extra instructions here saying refer to the template new client welcome and then hit save. And let's add another task. Let's say schedule first meeting. And we want to give them 7 days in order to get that scheduled. Let's do another task and we'll call it complete post-sale interview. Maybe we want to get extra feedback about how our sales process went with this new client, but we don't want to do that immediately. We'll do that, let's say 14 days down the road. And we could add another description here if we wanted to. We'll say refer to survey post-sale interview and then hit save. As I'm looking at this record, there's something else that would be helpful. If we had a column here that showed us not only the task name, but also how many days was it offset and even the description, that would be great, because then I don't have to click into each task to see if those details are correct or to review them. So in order to change which columns show up here, we've got two options to us. We can use a dynamic related list, or we could edit the page layout. Let's use the dynamic related list just to get some practice with this new feature. If you click in the related list that we currently have, you can see that we don't have any options to change what columns show up. It's actually telling us to go to the page layout to make those changes, which you certainly could. But we also have this ability here to use dynamic related list. So let's use that instead. And this lets us choose what columns show up without having to go to the page layout. On the right-hand side, we've got a lot of options here. It's pulling in our tasks related list, which is great. It's showing 10 records. I'm going to expand this to the maximum, which is 30 records. And then under related list fields, we can add additional fields. Going to add due date offset. Also going to add description and click save. Last thing to do is delete our default task related list. We don't need both of them. Hit save and then click back. And now we have a much more usable layout for this project template. Here's the details of our project template. Here are our task templates underneath it. And you can sort by date, offset, etc. Now let's take a look at our projects. If I click new project here, we could certainly create a manually generated project and we can relate it to an account, say Blouse Barn, change the status, add a description, and we could add a deadline as well. Now that we've created this project, on the right-hand side, we could also manually create a bunch of tasks. Say, do something, put a due date in here for tomorrow. It's already related to our project record. We could also relate it to a contact, change the status, etc. And that's how you'd go about creating a project manually and creating all the tasks related to it manually, which is useful if you have a one-off project. But what we really want to do is be able to leverage those templates for projects. To do that, we're going to need to create a screen flow. To create our screen flow, click the gear in the upper right-hand corner and bring up the flow area. Search for flows here in the quick find, and then you create a new flow. Now, there's actually a lot of ways that we could go about doing this. I recommend we create a screen flow because then we can have the user choose which template they want to use, if they want to use a template at all, or they can just bypass templates. And then we can also ask them which account we should relate this project to. If you wanted, you could also create a similar automation with a record triggered flow. So for example, we talked about earlier how you might want to have projects that are only ever related to opportunities. Well, when an opportunity is closed won, that could then be the record trigger to create a project related to that opportunity, and you don't need a screen for people to add extra details to. For us though, let's go with screen flow here. I think it's going to be most helpful when providing the user the ability to choose between the different templates. So click create. What I'd ultimately like to see is a button in the org that you can click, and then it gives you that screen that lets you choose from a template. We could also embed this screen directly onto a record and let people choose a template to create a project from there. So I'll show you how to do both. First thing to add is a screen element here. For our label here, I'm going to call this create new project. You could add an extra description here as well. And now I want to give our user a couple options. I want them to be able to choose from a template. I also want to give them the ability to bypass a template, to not have to choose one. And I'd also like them to be able to choose what account the project should be related to. Let's start with them being able to choose if this should be created from a template or created from scratch. We can do that with a pick list. So I'll just drag a pick list component over here, and we'll say for the label, would you like to create a blank project or from a template? So it says, would you like to create a blank project or use a template? And then down here, we can add our choices. So we're going to have two different choices. The first one will be template. So we'll have to create a choice, and we'll just call this from a template. Our choice label can be from a template. And our choice value, we'll just write in template to make it a little bit simpler. Then we can have our second choice, add a new choice resource here, select choice, and this will be blank project. Our choice value will be blank space project. Now, when they get to this screen, they'll have a pick list and they can choose from a template or from a blank project. This field should definitely be required so that we know what they want to do. The next thing we can add is another pick list, which lets them choose from templates. We'll say for the label, please select a template. This should also be required. And for our choice, select a new choice resource and choose a record choice set. So this is a great feature that allows you to essentially do a query on your database and provide different records as choices. So this is what we're going to use to present a list of the templates that are active. For the API name, I'm going to call this active templates. And the object is going to be our project template object. For our query, we want all project templates where active is equal to true, global constant true. You could sort these if you prefer. And then for the choice label, we want that to be the same as the name. And for our choice value, we want the value to be the ID. That way, we'll have the ID in our flow so that we can get all of those tasks that are related to that particular project template. And at the bottom of the screen, we can store additional fields. There is just one additional field that we want from that project, and it's the description. We want to copy that description over to our new project. So select fields down here and choose description. We're going to save the description from the selected project. And what we want to do is we want to save this in a variable. But I don't have a variable created yet, and it doesn't give me the option to create that new variable. So I'm going to save it for now, and then we'll come back here and we'll finish this step in a second. So click done, and you can see that our choices are going to be whatever active templates there are. That's what's going to show up in that dropdown. Then click done. Let's fix that last piece that I missed by clicking the bar in the upper left-hand corner to bring over that sidebar. Click new resource, and we'll create a variable. Our variable here is going to be called project description, and let's set that data type to text. Then click done. Now that we have that variable, we can go back into our record choice set to modify it to save the description. If you look on the left-hand side, here's all these different pieces that we've been building in the screen, and record choice set is there on the left-hand side too. Active templates. I'm going to select on active templates here, and now we can come back to that last step, select description for the variable, choose project description, which we just created, and hit done. Let's go back into our screen. The last piece of detail that we'd like to get from the user is what account this should be related to. So search for lookup on the left-hand side here, drag that over. For the API name for this lookup, we'll call this related account. And then what it's asking us for is what's the field API name right here. And then the fourth option here is what's the object API name. We'll get the values for that in just a second. Now, lookup fields can be a little bit tricky in flows because you're not just creating an independent component like you are with pick lists, where you can then select your choices, etc. You actually need to connect the lookup field in the screen to a real lookup field in your Salesforce org. It just uses that as sort of a like template so that whatever the real lookup field can see, this lookup field can see as well. A little confusing. I'm not sure why that's necessary, but it is. So this API name here is the API name for the field on the screen. The label is the question that shows up above it. So we'll say choose an account. And then the field API name and the object API name are the location of the real lookup field in your system. Luckily, we've already created a lookup field on our new project object. So we can go take a look at that object to put in the object API name and the field API name. So let's do that. Come over to the setup menu that you should still have open, and then pull up our new project object, and there's our API name right there. So for me, it's project rotive _ C. I'm going to copy that, paste that into the object API name, and then go into that project, go to fields and relationships, and there's our account lookup field right there. And it's just account _ C. Go ahead and paste that in there too. Make sure there's no spaces or anything. And then the last option here for required, go ahead and select that to true. Make sure that's required. And for maximum selections, I'm going to put 1 in there. We just want them to be able to choose one account. We don't want them choosing more than one account. Last thing to do is let's make this component visible only when they say that they want to create the project from a template. If they're saying they want to create a blank project, well, then we don't need them to choose a template. So select component visibility on the right-hand side once you've selected your pick list here, and choose all conditions are met. And then what we can do is actually reference the pick list right above it, which is, would you like to create a blank project or not? And if it equals from a template, then we want that pick list to be shown. If it does not equal from a template, then it's going to be hidden by default. And click done. Go ahead and hit save so you don't lose your work. I'm going to call this new project ScreenFlow and hit save. And then click debug just to see how it works so far. Now we don't really have anything happening in the background. It's just a screen, but at least we can test the screen out. We don't have any input variables. So you hit run and you can see, let me zoom in a little bit because it's all stretched out. Would you like to create a blank project or use a template? I could choose from a template or blank project. If I choose blank project, nothing shows up. If I choose from a template, our new pick list shows up right beneath it. And then to select a template, onboarding project is an option. I'm gonna go back and create a couple more of these template projects, but just know any project template that has been created that is marked as active is gonna show up here as an option. And then you can choose an account. And this is just a standard lookup field here. Choose Blouse Barn, and you can then hit finish. You can see the little red dot next to them means they're all required. That seems to be working pretty well. Now let's actually add in some functionality within our flow. Let's add another element beneath our screen that's going to be a decision. So we'll have two paths, one that goes the direction if they're choosing a template and one that goes another direction if they're not. I'm going to label this create from template ? And our new outcome here will be template. And our default outcome will be blank project. For our condition requirements, click on resource. And you can choose the screen component that we already created, where it says, would you like to create a blank project or not? And if that is equal to from a template, there's our choice option right there, then it's going to go down the template path. If it's anything other than that, which is only just the one other option, it would go down the blank project path. You can see here how these two paths eventually reconnect. We don't really need that. I actually think it's a little bit easier if we visualize them as being totally separate paths. So I'm going to click end here on the one side. So now we've got these two separate paths, but it doesn't really matter. I just think this looks a little bit cleaner. So let's do the blank project side first. Click the little plus sign, add an additional screen. And then on the left-hand side here, we can actually add in fields, which is a newer feature that's really useful. All we need to drop real fields onto the screen is a record variable. So create new resource. I'm going to call this blank project. Our data type. Oh, it looks like we already have API name using blank project. So I'm going to say blank project record. There we go. Our data type is going to be a record, and our object is going to be our project object. Click done. Now we have a record variable set in this fields area, and here we can drag over fields that we want to, fill out. So this saves us some time because now we don't have to create a separate screen component for account and deadline and project name. They just show up here for us and we can just drag them onto the screen if we want to. So I'll add our account, add a deadline, project name, status, and I'm going to rearrange this a little bit. I think I want project name to be first, then account's fine, deadline would be good, and status right after that. For the screen label, we can say this set project details, and then go ahead and hit done. Last step on this blank project is we actually want to create the project record. So choose create records, call this create blank project, and we know that we just want to create one project record, and we want to set the record fields from a record variable, which we created when we set that last screen component. So if you click under record, there's only one choice right now, and that's blank project record. Select that, and the field values were set by the previous screen. Click done. We should be good on that side. On the left-hand side, this is where things get a little more interesting. We now need to create a project record from our template, and then we need to create all of the tasks from those task templates. So the first thing we want to do is actually create that project record. We need to create it first because as we create tasks later, they're going to have to be related to the project. So the project has to exist before the tasks exist. Otherwise, we'd have to go back and create the tasks and then update the tasks, which would be less efficient. So first thing we're going to do, let's create a record to create our project. This time, we're not going to use all the values from a record variable. Instead, we're going to use separate resources and literal values. Then under Object, choose Project. And under Fields, this is where we can choose to set our account field. We can set a deadline, a description, and a name for our object. If you had additional fields on the project you wanted to automatically fill in, you could do that by adding them here too. So for account, go ahead and select that, and then go to the resource from our screen component where we selected the related account. You can see under screen components, it says related account. Click on that and select record ID. We always want to use a record ID as the value for a lookup, not the name of the record. For deadline, we don't actually have any data feeding into when our deadline should be on this project. So I'm going to delete this. It's not a required field, but you've got a couple other options. You could either just leave it blank, which is what I'm going to do in this case, or you could create a new resource and create a formula that was, say, today plus 30 days or something like that. Or you could even add a deadline offset on our project template, just like we did with the tasks that would say this project's due 45 days from the creation of the project. For now, though, we'll just delete that. Under description, you can scroll down to variables project description. That's the variable we created to put the selected templates description into this variable. So if you select that, we're going to be taking that value and putting it in the description of our new project. And then for the name of the project, what we really want is the name of the project template. But as I'm looking through our resources here, I'm remembering that under the screen component, we chose, please select a template that pick list. We said that the value of their selection should be the ID, not the name of the template. So we're missing that. So for right now, I'm just going to put in a little placeholder. I'm going to write in literally placeholder, and then we'll come back and we'll put in that dynamic project name in a second. Click done. On the left-hand side, go to our record choice set, active templates here, and let's edit our settings here. Under configure each choice, the label is the name, but the value is the ID. So we also need to save the label to a variable so that we can put it in our new project record, just like we did with the description. So create a new resource, have it be a variable. We'll call this project template name. Our data type is going to be text, and then click done. Now we can go back to our record choice set on the left here, active templates, and add another field right down here. So what we're saying is we want the name of that project to be saved to our new variable called project template name. Now that that is being saved, we can come to our create record step, and instead of having a placeholder, we can just use that variable. Here it is towards the bottom, project template name. This step is going to create our project record. And whenever you create a new record in a Salesforce flow, it automatically saves the ID, which we're going to reference later as we create these different tasks. So our next step is to get all of our template tasks. So we can get all of our template tasks, and then we're going to loop through them, essentially taking the data from each of the template tasks and putting them in a record variable for our task. And then we'll create all the tasks at one time, having them related to our project, and we'll be done. So our next step is to get records. We want to get task templates. The object that we want to get is going to be our project task template. Here it is, project task template. Select that. And the first thing we want to do is make sure that we're only getting tasks that are related to our project template. So select the project lookup field on that task and make sure that it's equal to the selection from our screen component. So come back down to screen components. Here's our please select a template pick list. Choose that, and that is going to insert the ID of the template project that they selected from that pick list. And so now we're going to get all the tasks that are related to that template. And that's actually all we need. We don't need to filter out any of these other tasks. We want to get all of the ones that are related to our template. At the bottom, choose all records and go ahead and select automatically store all fields so we have all the data that we might need. Click done, then hit the element button underneath that last step and choose loop. I'm going to call this for each task template. And what this will do is it'll loop through each of those tasks so that we can take some action on them. You can see under collection variables, we just have one collection variable. It's our project task templates from our last get step. And we're going to go from first item to last item. Doesn't really matter. We go from last to first too. Here's our loop. It's going to go around in a clockwise fashion. And then after the last one, it will output from the loop and go on to additional steps. What we're going to do here is add 2 assignment steps. So we'll add one assignment that is going to essentially take the details that are on our template task and push them over to a record variable. It's just going to be a task variable. And then we'll take that task variable and we're going to drop that in a collection. So by the end of all the looping, we'll have this collection of task records that are ready to be created within the database. I'm going to call this assign task values. And under variable, create a new resource. This is going to be a variable. Let's call this a task because it's just one task at a time. And this will be a record variable. And the record that we're interested in is the task record. This is your standard task object within Salesforce. Click done. And then what you can do is select that record variable and you can choose and set any field that's related to that task, including activity date and subject. So I'm going to select subject. I'm going to select that again. Let's go back to our a task record variable and let's do due date. There's our activity date, also our due date. Next one to add is going to be our description. And then after that, we can add our status. Now the status is easy to set because the status is just going to be our standard not started. Our description is pretty easy because we can just pull the description from the task that's in the loop. So under value for description, scroll down and you'll see that we have current item from loop. So as it loops through each task one at a time, it's going to drop that task into this current item variable. And then we can pull out any specific field from that task. In this case, we want description. We'll get to the due date in a second. Let's do the subject because that's pretty much the same. Scroll down to current item from loop and then go down to the name. So here's our task name. That's what we're going to use for the subject of our real task. And then finally, we've got our due date. Now we can't just drop in our due date offset number into this field because it's looking for a date value. If we just put in a number, it's going to give us an error. So what we need to do actually is create a formula. And our formula is just going to take today's date and it's going to add to it whatever we put in that due date offset field. Essentially, we're going to be adding days to today. So create a new resource, choose formula, and then let's call this due date formula. Under data type, the output is going to be a date. And then in our formula area, write today in all caps, open parentheses, close parentheses. That's a function that returns today's date. Then add the plus sign. And in the insert resources area, you can then scroll down and select current item from loop and choose due date offset. There it is. That's our number. So essentially that's going to be adding 7 or 14 or whatever we put to today's date to give us a future date for our due date. Check syntax, make sure everything's valid, and then hit done. Okay, so task subject is going to be the name of our task template. Our task due date is going to be the formula, which is taking today's date plus our offset number. Task description is going to come from our task template description, and status is going to be set to not started because that's a good default spot to put it. And click done. Now let's add another assignment step here. And what we're going to do with this is we're going to add the task to a collection. First thing we need to do under variables is create a new resource. It's going to be a variable resource that we can call the tasks. This is plural now because it's going to be more than one. Still a record, but we want to check the box to allow for multiple values. And the object is still going to be a task. Now, instead of the operator being equals, change this to add. And then for the value, choose a task. We don't need any subfield from a task. We want to take the whole task record, that's a variable right now, we want to drop it into our bucket for the tasks. So every time it loops through, it changes the field values for the a task variable, and then essentially duplicates that, copies it into the tasks collection. So it's going to increase how many of the tasks there are each time it loops. And then finally, when we're done with looping, hit the plus sign down here, and we can create all those tasks at one time. So choose Create Records. Let's call this Create Tasks. And we're going to create multiple records this time, and we'll use the record collection, the tasks. Then click Done. So it occurs to me we missed a really important field on our task variable. So come back to the Assign Task Values and click Edit Element. The one that we forgot was the project. We created the project first. We need all these tasks to be related to the project. We don't just want them to exist, somewhere in your database. We want them connected to our new project. So edit the assignment, and then under a new variable, choose a task and select what ID. The what ID field is that related to field on a task record. And we want that to be related to our newly created project ID. If you scroll down, you should see that we have a variable here called project ID from create project. This was automatically created for us by Flow. Click Done, and then go ahead and click Save in the upper right-hand corner. I think we're ready to test this. First thing to do is to debug it. So click Debug in the upper right-hand corner. Go ahead and click Run. First thing it's asking us is if we want to create a blank project or from a template. Let's go with blank project first, and then we'll choose an account. We'll choose Blouse Barn. Click Next. So far, so good. Looks like it took us to the correct screen, right? We're looking at the ability to fill out all these things automatically. So I'm going to call this manually created project. The account. So this is interesting, right? We chose the account on the first screen, and it's making us choose the account again on the second screen. That we're going to want to make a little easier for our users. And then for deadline, let's say the deadline's tomorrow. Status, we'll set to new. Hit Next. Okay, on the right-hand side, it said it created the records and the transaction was committed. So we've got no errors. That's great. So if we come back to our list of projects here, you can see that we now have two projects. The one that we manually created the first time and the one that we manually created the second time. It's a little hard to tell that. So I'm going to update our list view here. Let's include status, and let's include created date as well. Hit Save. There we go. We can see that we've got two different projects that were created at two different times. I just named them the same thing. Let's go back to our flow and let's debug this again. So here's our debug screen. This time we're going to create from a template. We're going to choose our onboarding project as our template, and we'll choose Jake's Woodshop this time as our account. Hit Next. Okay, no errors, which is good. If we look over on the right-hand side, we can see that tasks were created, multiple tasks were generated there. And then we can take a look at it in our all projects list as well. There it is, onboarding project. Let's click into here. We can see the description came through. That looks great. On the right-hand side, we've got all these tasks that were created as well. Post-sale interview, scheduled first meeting, etc. And the dates were today, 7 days down the road, 14 days down the road. If we look into send welcome email, under our description, in the comments field, we've got that description there. So that's looking really good. The only issue that we need to fix is we're asking our user for the account twice, which isn't a great experience. We're asking for it right here at the create a new project screen, and we're asking for it again when they set the project details manually. So there's a couple options here. What we could do is let them choose the account on the first screen, and then when it comes to the set project details, we could have that value automatically filled in. Or we can just hide the account choice on this first screen if they're choosing to create a blank project. And I think that's the easiest thing to do. It's a little bit simpler. And that way they're filling out all the details for that project on one screen instead of kind of doing it half and half. So this is easy to do. Select our component for choose an account, and we'll add component visibility to this one as well. And it's the same component visibility criteria as the select a template pick list right above it. Select the resource, which will be our pick list for whether they want to use a template or a blank project. You'll see that under screen components. Would you like to create a blank project or from a template? Select that. And if that is equal to from a template, then that account is going to get displayed. Hit save and then click activate. We can now use this flow in our system. We've got this ability to create templates with standard tasks. And now let's make it easy for people to be able to use this flow to create new projects. If we come back to our project management app, we can add the home page here as well. And then we can add our screen component directly to the home page to make it easier to create new projects. So go to the app manager in the setup screen and then find our project management app that we created earlier and click edit. Go down to navigation items and let's include home. Well, since we're here, I would also include reports and dashboards. We're not going to build out any reports or dashboards in this particular video, but all of our other lessons on reporting and dashboards applies here too. So it's pretty easy to create useful reports now that we have an object to track project status. Let's reorganize this. Let's have home at the top, project templates, projects, reports, and dashboards. That looks good. Click save, hit refresh. And now we can go to the home page. And on our home page here, we can edit this page to add our screen flow. On the left-hand side, search for the flow component. And I'm going to put it in the upper right-hand corner here. And we can choose our new project screen flow. As long as it's active, it should show up here. And we'll leave it as one column. Hit save and click back. Now with home pages, you can make different home pages for different apps. So if you just want this to show up on the home page for the project app, you can do this. But for this example, I'm just going to apply it to our home page more broadly. And there it is. It's sitting on our home page, makes it really easy to either just ignore or to say, I want to create a project from a template. I'm going to choose the onboarding project, and I'm going to choose University of Arizona. Click next. And that's it. It's been done. Now there's a lot of stuff we could do to expand on this. As I mentioned earlier, we could create logic in there to assign tasks to different people or different roles. We could also take this screen flow and package it in a button so that it then gets added to the account object, for example. And when somebody clicks new project on the account, it could automatically take that record ID from the account and create a project based on that. Now there's a lot of things you can do to build upon what we've already created, right? You could add a lot more functionality to the template. We could be assigning tasks to different people based off their profile or based off who we assigned in the template task. We could also add additional screens to this flow. A nice little, thank you page at the end is always a good idea. Maybe a link to the new project that's been created, etc. But I think this is a really good start because what you have now is an easy way to create project templates, have tasks that are related to them, and duplicate those projects over and over again. Let's go back to our page to make sure that we've checked all of our boxes. So we've made an app to easily access the objects through those tabs. We've created a screen flow to generate the project. And the last thing we need to do is create a permission set to access these new objects. So this one's important because you want to give other people access to this functionality, and you don't want to have to necessarily modify all of their profiles. That's one option, is just to go into that profile and edit it. But if we create a permission set, it should be a little bit easier. So in the setup menu, go to users, go to permission sets, and create a new permission set. We can call this project management access. What you could do here is you could actually create two different permission sets, one that is admin level project management access and one that is user level. So maybe just the admins get access to the templates and the users only get access to the regular projects, as an example. And you've got a lot of control over that security. For now, though, I'm just going to make one permission set to give people access to these new custom objects. Once you've hit save on that new permission set, you can go to object settings And let's take a look at the 3 new objects we created. The first one is projects. So click edit, make that tab available and visible, and we'll give the person read, create, edit, and delete access. We'll also give them edit access to all these fields on that object, and then hit save. I'm not including the view all, modify all permission set. You certainly could. It's not really necessary at this point. And if you choose to secure your projects in the future, so for example, they can only edit the projects that they own, then you wouldn't want that checked. Next one, let's take a look at our project template. I'm going to search for that in the search bar at the top. That's going to bring us straight to the object settings for project templates. And I'm going to choose the same settings here. We'll make that visible. We'll enable read, create, edit, and delete rights. And we'll give edit access to these different fields as well. Last one to take a look at is the project task template. Do read, create, edit, delete access there, and the ability to edit that description too. Now that we've got that permission set, you can click manage assignments and you can assign it to any other users within the org. But again, create this project in a sandbox first, and then you can package it up through a change set and push it into production when needed. I hope you found this video helpful. Let me know if you like these sorts of long tutorials, these long build with me type videos in the comments. Let me know what other sorts of projects you'd like us to cover. And I'd love to know how you're going to build upon what we've already created here and how you could make it better for your own org. If you prefer not to build out all of these steps yourself to create a project management app, we've made it available on our website for purchase. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.